and transparent robots. That's my vision for it.
I like that. There's magic and robots. Hello and welcome to episode 136 of Rockstar CMO FM. The M is for marketing and the F is for, well, you decide. As you're probably wondering, does the world need another effing marketing podcast? I'm your host, Ian Truscott. I'm no rockstar, but I've picked up a thing or two over the last 20 years on my tour from sysadmin to CMO, and each week I chat to the true rockstars, my fabulous guests and chums, and share with you some marketing street knowledge that will hopefully inspire your inner rockstar. Come and say hello. We are Rockstar CMO on Twitter and LinkedIn, and proud members of the Marketing Podcast Network. This episode was recorded on Friday the 14th of October 2022. I hope you've had a good week. You are well, safe, and staying as sane as you feel you need to be. On this week's episode, in the studio, Jeff Clark and I chat about influencers. I go backstage with Don Richmond, the co-creator of Filmio, for our first dip into Web3, and we wind down the week in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar for a cocktail with Robert Rose. But first, we need to pay the bar tab. I'll be back in a moment.
We'll be right back after this word.
We'll be right back
After this word.
Tillamook Chocolate Collection Ice Cream is a total chocolate game changer. We start with unbelievably creamy dark chocolate ice cream. Then we add different chocolate treats, like chocolate cookies, chocolate cake, or chocolate brownies, to make 4 decadent chocolate flavors. Because sometimes the thing that pairs best with chocolate is more chocolate. Tillamook Chocolate Collection Ice Cream. Extraordinary dairy.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the boys' club of advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe.
Time for our first segment, the Marketing Studio with Jeff Clark, former Forrester Serious Decisions Research Director and sought-after marketing advisor. This week, we are under the influence of influencers. Welcome, Jeff, or welcome me to the Marketing Studio with Jeff Clark.
If you want me to do the welcome, I'm more than happy to do
I think that's what I'm going to have to start doing. Yeah, I'm going to have to start,
Come on in.
Welcome me. Yeah.
Open the door. Come on in.
And now I need to create another sound effect for the Marketing Studio door coming to a close. Yeah. I was actually, when I was thinking about this, and we called this the Marketing Studio, I was thinking about that actor studio, the studio thing that was on TV where they would talk to a famous actor.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that? I don't know. Anyway, the Marketing Studio with Jeff Clark. How are you, Jeff? All right?
I'm doing very well. I'm doing very well.
Good. Very good. And I'm going to touch on the weather as usual. How is the weather in New England?
Well, we have had some, in New England, we have the beautiful fall colors, and it has been beautiful and this year. But we're getting a big rainstorm coming through. I don't know, it's probably some, dregs of a hurricane or something that's coming up the coast. Yeah. So we may lose some of those, but otherwise things are great.
You're going to have the peepers. The leaf peepers.
Oh, leaf peepers. Yep.
Yeah. And it's very similar here in Old England, apart from bright blue sky today, and our leaves are on the turn as well. So beautiful autumnal or fall day, as whichever side of the pond.
I love the word autumnal. It just has a nice ring to it.
Yeah, but I quite like the literalness of fall, actually. So I quite like some American English. I think it's, yeah. Anyway, this week we did some prep. And, I say we did some prep. You did some prep.
Somebody had to do it.
But it's a topic I think we've been meaning to get to for a while from both of our backgrounds. And because we often refer to analysts and research and reach. And these are fundamental things of part of our Epic Marketing Fundamentals, and it's influencer marketing, which in B2B for me includes analyst relations, bloggers, PR, and all that good stuff. What say you, Jeff?
Well, I think, and you're right. We when we talk about market research, we talk about brand. Various things we touch on. Leveraging influencers, and I think that it's the interesting thing, as we were discussing a while ago when we had this idea, is that in the old days there was like the AR, PR, IR. So, you've got your comms team that's got a person who deals with analysts, a person that deals with press, a person that deals with investor relations, and, it was reasonably simple. And certainly there was a discipline to it. And now it's kind of all, it's kind of blown up a bit, expands. And certainly, with my first job, we were beholden to, I worked at a company that created word processing software. So we were beholden to the reviewers that were at PC Magazine and PC World. And there's still people out there doing reviews. And obviously there's the Forresters and Gartners doing waves and quadrants. But, it's just, it's gone so far beyond that, because anybody who's got a blog, people are active on social, which could be, companies like a Hubs. I was thinking about MarTech. I mean, you got HubSpot is, there's just a Hootsuite, you have companies that, because of their own efforts to have a social media presence and have kind of a somewhat third party, blog site or something like that, then it's like, my gosh, anybody can get into this role and be an influencer. And even a couple of old analysts who find themselves doing a weekly podcast could be an influencer. Yeah.
Well, there's
not to mention any names, by the way.
I'm not sure. We could be influencers, couldn't we?
We could be.
We could set ourselves, and then the ads we could be advertising. And this week, brought to you by Salesforce. Or HubSpot, as you've just mentioned. But also, around MarTech, there's lots of prominent blogs, isn't there, around marketing technology.
Absolutely.
And there's our chums at Cabinet M, who also are pretty influential there as well. And the interesting thing, I should have started off the preface from an influencer marketing perspective. We're just going to look at this from a B2B perspective, right?
Correct.
So, I'm gonna, because I chatted with Jason Falls on this show a while ago, who's the author of Winfluence and very much an influencer marketing expert. And two things came out of that conversation. One of them is he describes some influence as the duck-faced V sign crowd. Yeah, exactly. The people that just we're not talking about those people that are on Instagram. And but he also, when I was talking to him about B2B influencer marketing, he felt that because we've got this, exactly what you were talking about, we've always had to do influencer marketing, right? Because of the strength of the analysts in most of
helping make tech, complex buying decisions.
Yeah, exactly. So we definitely, as B2B marketers, we definitely got to care about influencer marketing, only we might call it something different, AR, PR, and IR, right? Which, in my view, I lump all that together these days, right? It used to be you'd have a, like you said, an AR, somebody responsible for AR, somebody responsible for PR, but really we've got to bring those folks together. But, and I think we've kind of touched on this, but why should we care about influencers?
Well, I think that one of the things in your recent drops from the episode with Liz High, where she was talking about the 5 principles, and she was talking about, think like a brand, specifically not like a bank, but obviously was widely applicable. And her 5th principle was do the coaching. So, so again, if you want to be trusted as a brand, then you've got to help coach your buyers and your potential buyers. And, as we've often talked about in our 5 fundamentals and other things, that there's, it's all about meeting buyer needs. And of course, that's one way of expressing it, from solution selling on to, pain points, et cetera. But it all comes down to understanding what the buyer need is. And in many cases, you have to educate customers on how to solve problems. And that's one of the things, they're looking out to influencers and to analysts, and less so to the vendors, to say, how do I solve a problem? So, if I'm running into a productivity issue in my marketing department, or I'm running into a closing issue in my sales team, or I'm running into, IT issues or whatever, then it's like, it may not be obvious as to how I solve the problem. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to look for people who can help educate me on how to solve that problem. And the key thing about why, I as a marketer or as somebody who is at a company selling products and services is that I want to be aligned with the advice that those influencers are giving to the buyers.
Right. So there's two things we're using, and I think this very much leans to the relationship one would have with an analyst, right? And something that I kind of ranted a bit on my Tuesday 2 cents column on my own blog this week about category, right? Is that the analysts are very much about defining the category you're in, but also there's a positive and educational element to that, isn't there? In that, the point I was making was that vendors want to be differentiated too far and say that they're in a unique category of their own, right? But if you do that, there's no marketplace. You have to have competitors, and you have to have somebody defining that. And you're saying the influencers in creating that marketplace, right? They're educating the buyer. This is the marketplace to solve your problems. Here are the competitors that do that.
Yeah. And you want to differentiate on the how you solve the problem.
Yes,
the fact that you're totally different. You're solving a totally different problem than the other people in the market.
But so that answers the question: why do we care about influencers? Because they basically make the market, basically, don't they? Yeah. So we've taken that approach. How do you identify who we need to influence in our particular category and who we want to influence, I guess, in our category?
Yeah. Well, you've got to go find out where the buyers are going for advice, and when I was at Forrester Serious Decisions, we call that what are the watering holes? Where does the buyer or the various personas of the buyer, because there'd be different answers for different people in different roles. They'll go to different locations for getting advice, and sometimes they're just going to go to colleagues, which is different than the influencers, but. That's where, the traditional analysts that we talk about, maybe one source. And so you can do the obvious thing about, go to the analyst and say, what do you think about how people are solving this problem? And, what advice are you giving so I can help align with that? You might also ask them, well, where are the buyers, the buyers you talk to, because they do talk to the buyers on a regular basis. Where are they going for other sources of information? And so you can, kind of use that to help, branch out from the more traditional sources. And then also, talk to the customers, do interviews, do surveys, ask sales reps, where's everyone getting their information? So you can kind of create a laundry list, and this would, obviously the laundry list would include all the various types of influencers we mentioned before, and then you can rank them. And I've seen reference to the, rank on 3 R's: relevance, reach, resonance. So obviously, if there's a blogger who seems to be smart, but his reach is, a couple hundred individuals, you may say, well, that might not be important. But if there's somebody who is not only resonating with customers, not only seems to be really relevant to solving the problem, but has a broader reach, then it's like, okay, I'm going to rate them higher. And kind of score the influencers out there so that you can start doing your outreach.
Well, also, I think that those kinds of scores might change what you want to use the influencer for, because I think if you're going to have an influencer marketing program, then part of that investment is you want to, you might find somebody who's incredibly knowledgeable and relevant, but doesn't have a lot of reach. You might be able to help them with that. So that sort of symbiotic relationship starts where you can help them with reach and they help you with third-party content. So that's really interesting. We want to. The other thing is so would you add this as part of your sort of persona work, and who influences this persona? Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, I think this is work. I think if I think about developing a go-to-market or a campaign that's supporting the go-to-market, I mean, this is up in the beginning stages. So this is where you're really, before you're formulating messages that are specific to the buying, not necessarily brand messages. I mean, not necessarily corporate brand messages, but now you're getting down to your particular product or solution. This is the work you do in those early stages, because before you actually roll your messaging out, you want to make sure, again, you're aligned with what advice that these influencers are giving. You're using them as input. You can use them as input for your own campaign messaging. And as you just said, I mean, you can actually make them part of the campaign, whether they're providing content or whether they're just inputs.
Okay. And then to my point about personas, you would actually have that ranked, like, okay, so here's my persona's needs, but here are the people that influence them when they're making a buying decision. Yeah, absolutely. So if we decide we're going to start dealing with influencers, and we've sort of touched on that a little bit just a moment ago, which is there's various things we can, with of course, if it's Forrester, it doesn't matter if you pay a subscription or not, right? They're independent. So, but so what are the rules?
I'm not allowed to comment on that. Yes, I sign an agreement that I can't make agreements on whatever.
So that NDA you got with Forrester lasts forever. You signed your soul away.
Right, I think it's part of my estate. Well, certainly, I mean, as you mentioned, NDAs. I mean, the thing is that you've got to have rules, and this can get, particularly when you get into social media, this can get pretty deep in terms of what are the guidelines. Obviously, having a non-disclosure agreement is essential because you're sharing information with them, they're sharing information with you. Perhaps being, as you said, on a subscription or having a seat, whatever, with one of the analysts or whatever is going to be important, because they'll obviously give you more information if you're a paying customer. But then as you start using, whether you're using their quotes, comments, content. They're sharing things on social. They're speaking at conferences. Then it's like you've got to make sure there's disclosure guidelines, and you're you're clear about whether something, like in many companies we did the total economic impact analysis is with a Forrester, so it's got to be very clear. So vendor ABC paid for this. So it's likely an independent third-party view, but it does happen to be paid for by the vendor to provide this perspective.
And if you look lower down the food chain of influence, we've been discussing in the sort of podcast network that we're part of, the MPN, is that new rules are coming in from the advertising standards agency here in the UK, that you need to be very clear on a podcast about when something is ad supported. So if I had a guest that paid to be on the show, I would need to say that. I don't have guests that pay to be on the show.
But I do not pay to be on the show.
but I do have ads, and what I do is I make it very clear when something is an ad and when something is a feature, and so I think that where you're talking about social media and that relationship with influencers, it's beholden on them as well to be very clear about when the content they're producing is
their reputation's on the line.
Yeah. And that it's no good for either party, is it? If that trust gets broken down because you've crossed the line on something like that. So that's a good start. So we're going to engage with these influencers, and we got to do various things like get sign up for a subscription. How do we then use them? How's the best way to leverage the influencers?
This is probably where we could go through a million use cases, but it's like, I think you kind of think of the basics, or the starting with, okay, we need to get aligned on messaging and advice. So it's like, this is what you're telling customers. This is what we think we're telling customers. Is what we're saying resonating? Does it feel like we're telling the truth, or we're providing value? Using their research, we kind of mentioned this, to craft your campaigns. Their input into how you're messaging and how you're talking to customers is helpful. Getting them to write third-party independent content that you can leverage is absolutely helpful. I mean, we've run together in various roles we've run campaigns where some piece of research, it may not have been what the campaign centered on, but it was certainly very supportive, or it helped us, build a momentum for an event, a webcast, or whatever. having an analyst and a customer talk about, what they've received, a benefit from a solution. I mean, all these things, you're just building more and more credibility because, it's certainly, one of the things, and I note, I think this was from some research that was done that posted on a Hootsuite site, is like, the influencer marketing materials will outperform in terms of the impact. They outperform your own branded materials. So the more, and it may not be, it doesn't outscore it by magnitudes of 2 or something like that, but it's still the more you can use that third party branded material, the more. I mean, again, it comes back to we're trying to help the customer solve problems. So that's where you're putting yourself in the role of I'm helping you solve a business problem.
Yeah, I've been on every side of this particular thing, right? So I've commissioned a third-party independent content, which has performed much better than any content a vendor would be. There's a trust thing, right? And people aren't going to trust the voice of the vendor. I've been an analyst and had everybody, enjoying every word I spoke. And then when I joined the vendor, nobody believed me anymore. So, and so I've provided that kind of content. In fact, here on Rockstar CMO, there's a couple of sponsored pieces that we've done for folks. So maybe I shouldn't be plugging what we do at Rockstar CMO on our own podcast, but I should have put that in an ad.
Yes,
for the authorities, that was an ad. It's like that consulting thing, isn't it? When you're a consultant and you enter the room and you tell people what to do, and then somebody pulls you aside. He goes, "I've been telling them this for years." And so it's the same with that content, isn't it? The third party just is more credible than you are. You just can't get over that. Right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've also, I have a couple other examples that popped in my head. I worked at a company where we had acquired an open source integration product, and the company actually had people who were like thought leaders in the development world, the open source development world in Java, on the payroll, and they had to maintain their independence. But they were out there commenting, in forums and on blogs and stuff like that. And they, the association with the vendor was there, but it was kind of downplayed. So it's like, that's, to me, that was like the extreme of using influencers because, hey, they're on the payroll, but but people respect them. And certainly, and just to briefly touch on when I worked at Pega and our CEO, Alan Treffler, who, not as much in the product space, but certainly in the investor world, because again, there's a set of influencers. I mean, he was often on shows talking, and he was talking about business change. So that then he becomes an influencer more broadly than just the product we're selling, but obviously he's representing a brand. So that's that's another is just how do you take somebody who's in the company and make them a credible influencer.
Yeah, that's a whole topic in itself, isn't it? Because the other thing about influencer is you're going to use these influencers for different things. In that instance, you want to demonstrate your company. One of the things is trust your company from a financial perspective, right? So it might be that you want to influence the financial community. It isn't just always the buyer, is it? That this is a broad thing you want to take. And I think that influencer on the payroll thing is an interesting point because there is a fine line, and the thing is whilst you want to have your influencers under NDA, they're not exclusive to you, and that there's a value in that, right? That you need them to talk to other vendors, you need them to be out in the market, because that two things that makes them credible, but it also keeps their knowledge fresh. As soon as you get somebody who's now, sipping too hard on your Kool-Aid, you've lost some of that objectivity, haven't you?
And I always wondered about, like we talk about HubSpot of being an influencer, and they obviously put Scott Brinker on the payroll as CMO. And so Scott Brinker being like one of the foremost MarTech influencers, and now he's with so there's the associated brand value of having him there, but then how do you keep him being, as you said, independent? And I'm not as close enough to what he's been doing recently to give a opinion on that. But to me, that was an interesting issue to run into.
Well, that's another topic, isn't it? About hiring influencers or hiring analysts as a vendor, because that you better be hiring them because they're good at their job as a marketer, because that value as an influencer is going to wane, isn't it? And they're going to,
yes,
the market's going to lose trust in them because now they're part of your tribe.
Yep. Yeah.
Anyway, yes. So we thought we'd struggle with time on this one because it's such a fascinating topic. But what about approaching this? We can in-house this? I've in-housed this kind of thing before. But should we use tools? Should we use agencies? How do
it's like personally, I don't have a lot of experience with tools or agencies that help you in this. I mean, other than the fact that, like doing like social media monitoring intelligence where you can pick up, who's talking about topics and things like that. But outside of that, I mean, to me, this is where, building your relationships, you want to have a relationship with the influencers. Yeah. So doing your own work and doing it, one-to-one as opposed to a third party. And maybe, if you've got a PR agency or, or an IR agency, you can use them to introduce you to people. But I think ultimately you don't want them to be the go-between. You want to make sure you've built that relationship and you're doing your own work and you're tracking it yourself with your own tools.
Yeah, absolutely. And I absolutely agree, because it is about relationships. And I think you can't do that via a third party. So that's excellent. So we kind of skated across the surface there of influencer marketing for B2B. So I think we can, or influence relationships for B2B. I think there's plenty there we could dig into. But we're on the last agenda item. Jeff, what song am I going to play out with this week?
Well, it's a little out of the rock genre, but Bruno Mars, "Count on Me" from 2010. He's got a good message. If you ever find yourself lost in the dark, you can't see, I'll be the light to guide you. So again, we're helping people solve problems. So we and our influencers will guide you.
Yeah, a very positive way to end, and how we feel about analysts in the industry and influencers. So that's wonderful. So I'll play out with
some
Bruno
of my
Mars.
Best friends are analysts, by the way.
I know. So, some of my best friends are former analysts, or at least people that I've met through this podcast. Yeah. All right, mate. I'll let you go for another week. And will you be back in the studio next week?
Yes.
Good. And I don't think. We'll introduce the topic when we get there. We haven't got one ready to share now. So. Yeah. All right, mate. I'll speak to you next week on something else, and have a great week, mate.
Yeah. Take care. Cheers.
See you then. Bye.
If you ever find yourself stuck in the middle of the sea, I'll sail the world to find you. If you ever find yourself lost in the dark and you can't see, I'll be the light to guide you. Find out what we're made of when we are called to help our friends in need. You can count on me like 1, 2, 3.
Thank you, Jeff. And that was a little snippet of "Count on Me" by Bruno Mars from 2010. And if you have any feedback or think Jeff or the band here can help with your influencer marketing, give us a shout. You can contact us through the website at rockstarcmo.com. Right, time to go backstage with something a little bit different this week, as I've shied away from Web3 on this show, as plenty of other much better podcasts cover this. But I got the opportunity to chat with a fascinating chap, Don Richmond, who's the Chief Marketing Officer of Ingredient X, the film and software development studio specializing in blockchain, DeFi, decentralized finance, and NFT technologies. And as you will hear, Don is the co-creator of Filmio, the world's most powerful decentralized filmmaking ecosystem that places Hollywood decision-making onto the blockchain and into the hands of creators and fans. Don has had a splendid creative agency marketing career with over 20 years of experience working with such notables as HBO, DIRECTV, ESPN, Barnes & Noble and Showtime, including the launch and management of the DIRECTV Sports platform, working with sports legends like Kobe Bryant and Peyton Manning. He's also a 6-time author and illustrator, and now I'm delighted to welcome him to Rockstar CMO FM. Welcome, Don, to Rockstar CMO FM. How are you?
Hey, I'm doing great.
It's good to see you. It's good to see you. So, for people that don't know you, Don, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I'm the CMO of Ingredient X, which is the Ingredient X is the film and software development studio, and we specialize in blockchain, DeFi, and NFT technologies, including the creation of Filmio, which is our it's the world's most powerful decentralized filmmaking ecosystem.
Right. And I think that's interesting because we're in the space now of Web3, right? And NFTs and all that stuff, and DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, is totally hot right now. So I'm hoping most of my listeners, some of them might be filmmakers, but most of my listeners are marketers. Tell us a little bit about what is a DAO and how that structure works.
Well, that's great because first, a little caveat, I'm a marketer, so I'm not a technologist. So in order to really explain a DAO, you should be a technologist, but I'll do my best. Mm-hmm. So when people first come to the idea of DAOs for the first time, and they need a simple definition, I think the best way to think of a DAO is it's a magic internet community in which the board of directors are every member, whose voices generally increase with participation in the DAO, and whose consensus decisions are carried out by powerful, punctual, neutral, and transparent robots. That's my definition for that.
I like that. There's magic and robots.
Magic robots.
That's fantastic. So
right now, most DAOs are financial DAOs. So they're they're funds. So people pull together resources and they govern how the resources are used. So they're mostly investment DAOs. They pool to buy assets, but you certainly don't need. There's a thousand other uses for a DAO. So using that technological template of a DAO, people can transform any legacy industry from finance to filmmaking.
Right. Which is where you come in. So how do you describe the difference between the decentralized filmmaking ecosystem that you've created with Filmio versus what people might understand to be a regular, structure of making a film?
That's a great question. So taking a step back, I think what DAOs can do are, if you look at it, everything that was wrong with Ebenezer Scrooge's business is now gone.
Right.
So gone are the centralized controls, mitigated are the inequities, the inequalities, done away with are the funding blocks. And what's left is a deep sense of social dignity and efficient mechanisms for performing business functions at scale. So that's what a DAO can do. So what we do is the film industry. We saw, we had a few friends that were lamenting their treatment by Hollywood, rough play, right? And the film industry, we recognize, needs to put the power back into the hands of creators and fans. So when you convert an industry into a DAO, there's the creation of a useless class. So the useless class in this case are all those, middlemen that do all their fantastic work these days, but who proliferate maybe some of those bad functions that we associate with Hollywood. So you don't need that anymore. That's all mediated by the DAO. So all that governance is now in the hands of people, in the hands of fans. So people with, anywhere in the world can have their voice heard, and any creator can have their film or TV project funded, produced, distributed, no matter what, their connections. You don't need to have those connections anymore.
Oh, right, that's interesting. So, this is very much the Web3 way, isn't it? You hear a lot of the conversation around Web3 happening with the creator community. So this sounds like you're giving access to an audience and to resources to filmmakers as creators, right? Without those sort of barriers that traditionally exist.
Yeah, think about it. You have a film, either a script or a film,
Yeah.
What do you do with it? Where do you start? What's the path? If I want to be a doctor, that's extremely complex, but at least there's a path.
Yeah.
No, I don't want to be a doctor. I want to be a filmmaker. What's my path?
Right. And so how do people sort of get involved? How does Filmio actually work? You know, let's imagine that I do have a script, and obviously it's excellent, but nobody's interested in it. How does one, how does one engage with something like Filmio? Or if I'm a filmmaker or whatever is the right persona that you would say fitted it, how does one engage with it, and how would it help?
Yeah, if you're a creator, you would join the Filmio DAO, and it allows you to submit your project as a proposal. So proposal in air quotes.
Yeah.
You would ask fans to show their support for your project and believe in it by staking their tokens. We have a proprietary Go score that would then give a predictive score to your project's success and help move it along the system.
Wow,
so we create a path for you. Yeah.
Right. So all the people that are in film, all of the people in the Filmio community have these tokens that they can not spend or bet, I don't know what the right term is, on these new projects.
Vote or stake. Yeah,
stake. And they're
used. That's good. I mean, it's used for governance. So really, it's a store of governance. So if you would think of it, it's a signifier, just like a token. Token comes from the root word to signify. And you're signifying something. What are you signifying? Governance intent.
Right.
So somebody's governance power might be higher because what we've seen is they make better decisions, better governance decisions. So they have a higher reputation in on the platform.
Right.
So the pooling together of all these reputational votes, these governance votes, creates where the platform should go with each individual proposal and with the governance of the platform altogether.
Right. So you're kind of creating a film hit machine, really, of trying to bring in ideas, and then through the way that I guess algorithms work and that the people are staking, you're then introducing a prediction of success. So then that then helps the filmmaker then get his her film made, and move through the process. Yeah,
it's an incubator, so to speak. And I mean, it's great because it eliminates a lot of people. There's like a very small group of people making the majority of decisions for tremendous number of films that are proposed.
Right.
So to be a creator right now, it's easier, or not easier, it's about the same stats to become an NBA basketball player as it is to be a creator. Yeah, that's ridiculous.
Right. And does it, because you're stripping out a lot of the middlemen and therefore the cost and all of that friction, does this mean that there's a lower bar to somebody finding some success? So it might be that it's a small, what used to be considered an independent film that has a relatively small audience, but because you haven't had to, fight for 3 years and spend all that money, you can actually produce the movie gets made. Do you see is that sort of benefit you're seeing?
I would say that's a fair assessment. Also, we just need more, I would say, environmental backgrounds of the people that are making the decisions. So more varied voices need to be heard. And if that's not obviously the speak right now in Hollywood, but it's not coming to pass. The way that can come to pass is for a DAO to make the decisions. Then you have such a variety of voices that now you're really just starting to see the films that have and TV shows that have the talent are the ones that are rising. It's not that, this one, comes from this background, so we aren't really seeing traction with that. Well, it's not that you're not seeing traction. You're afraid to bet on that, and you don't have any validation metrics behind it. Well, we give these films the validation metrics so that they can be seen as being as worthy as another film that comes from a different environmental background.
Right. So because of the nature and the breadth of the community you have in the DAO and the types of people you have you therefore, you then have more diverse thinking about what people might like in terms of films, rather than, a small class of tastemakers. You actually, putting it out to a much wider community of, would you like this? Would you stake it?
That's right. That's exactly right. So what you're doing is you're taking your the symbol or the store of value of your governance, and you are then staking it and saying, my intent is that this represents my viewpoint. So it's really a great mechanism for what you would say, sort of governing a whole process that's a multi-step process,
right?
And being able to oversee every piece of it. Right. So it's very complex to make a film, as we're seeing, costs $300 million. But at what point are you finally getting audience feedback? Well, in Hollywood, they're getting it right at the end.
Yes.
At the end, they're putting together all these focus groups and saying, well, how should we market this? Forget about marketing it. Make something worthwhile to begin with, right?
Yeah. And so I guess the strength of Filmio is in the people you have involved in the DAO, I guess, isn't it? I mean, you need to encourage that diversity, right?
That's right. It's a double equal sign. It's an exact equivalence. Filmio is the power of the DAO. It can't be us.
But I find, I'm relatively inexperienced in this whole Web3 world. I live in B2B tech marketing, firmly still in Web2, figuring out whether an NFT is a good idea for a marketing campaign. So just to level set, right? But you said that you're a marketer and you've come from that background. What is it that my listeners, the marketers that listen, need to know about DAOs? And if they get involved and they're perhaps looking to market it down, take something like Filmio to market, what's the different challenges they might have?
Well, the first thing to know about DAOs is that it's based on the blockchain, and the blockchain is probably the most I can't tell you how spectacular an innovation that was. If you think of the internet as being a spectacular innovation, the blockchain is equivalent. So that's right now it's happening. And just like you had people saying, well, should I buy a computer? What do I need a computer for? Should I get a website for my business? Why do I need a website for my business? Now people are saying, well, do I really need to be on the blockchain? What's the value of the blockchain? You're like, my God, this again, So, but that's natural in these type of revolutions. These, the structure of scientific revolutions, the Kuhnian revolutions, in which a paradigm shift is occurring. So with this paradigm shift, we're having DAOs now as being this like beautiful mechanism for disintermediating a whole group of people that were in between you and what you needed, the two peer-to-peer endpoints of a transaction. They're now being disintermediated, and you can deal directly with people. What do you need a gigantic centralized banking institution for? I mean, it's just, at this point, a DAO could replace a government. I mean, that's how big this thing is. But it's like a hyper object. So it's so giant that people aren't seeing really what's coming toward them. It's coming, like a glacier. But we're now seeing the true value of these, where it collides with actual useful industries like the filmmaking industry. Suddenly, film is done differently. Amazon did it with Web 2, where we were saying, why would we buy a book online? Why don't I just go to the bookstore? I'll just hop in my car and get a book. Well, now we know how stupid that question was, right? Not that bookstores are bad. I love bookstores. But The whole point being, now we're seeing it come to market. So the first thing that you need to know if you're going to bring your DAO to market, it's kind of like you need a message. So your message in a Web 2 sense is a negotiation with your market. A message in a Web 3 sense is delivering a gospel. So you really have something that is so beautiful and so life transforming that you have to let people know. So that's a huge education problem for the marketer.
Right.
So educate.
Right.
And then the next step, once they're on board, is to get them to engage, because not too many people are going to know what to do when they get there.
Right. And so, I mean, if I think about you probably marketing Filmio, it sounds to me like the first thing you needed to market was the fact it was a DAO, and that's a brand attribute of, if I use that kind of marketing terminology of Filmio, is that it is a DAO, and that's that primary brand attribute that that then attracts the audience into. And then the fact that you make films is kind of not secondary, if you know what I mean. It is part of it.
It's the next layer. That's right.
Yeah. Do you think that would?
That's right.
Do you think that's? I mean, well, a couple of things from what you were saying is that analogy to the dawn of the internet. I've heard that a couple of times actually. That some of this stuff, NFTs, some of the cryptos, some of that isn't going to work. Just the same way as some of the big hype in the internet. At the dawn of the internet didn't work, but there's something here that will move forward, and we should all get educated on it and think about how it might impact our lives going forward and come up with these interesting ideas. But do you think there's a point at which what the scenario I just described, where the DAO is the fact that Filmio is a DAO is the important part? Do you think that will change? Do you think people will just be like, I just, Filmio is the best way of me getting what I want to get done. The fact it's a DAO it becomes inconsequential, because it's like saying in the old internet days, wasn't it, that it was a hyperlink or whatever the sort of terminology we used to use is now that we don't use that terminology anymore. Do you think, is that where this is going to go, do you think?
I kind of question the framing. So it's okay, but my vision of the framing of Web 2 was that it doubled down on the promises made by just the internet. Yeah. So at first we were saying, oh, the internet is this, and we didn't even know what we didn't know yet, of how great it could be. So then we had social media. We weren't ready for that as a culture. And then it just ballooned. So that's exactly what's happening now, is at first you had smart contracts, and you had, now we have DAOs, which are really exploding out. So you could almost say that DAOs are like the Web 3.5 of the Web 3 movement. And so it's just going to intensify. And so few people could see it. I mean, who could see it? Like Marshall McLuhan, maybe. But there's no futurist that could have imagined what could have happened moving so quickly to get to the point where we don't need large centralized institutions. We can decentralize, and that's in everyone's best interest. So it's scary, it's big, it's beautiful, and it's exciting. And it's
entirely exciting and fascinating. It's one of those topics where I feel like the more I know, the more I don't know. Do you know what I mean? Like, it leaves me thinking I need to understand this a bit more. So I'm looking at the time, and this is fascinating, and particularly applying it to your industry and to Filmio. So I'm going to move to our final question. And I know you're I don't know if you describe yourself as a former marketer or still a marketer, but we have a regular feature, the Rockstar CMO Swim Pool, our portal to hell, where we throw all the bullshit snake on overhyped trends that plague the marketing industry we love. Bit of a shifting gears from talking about Web3, but what would you chuck in?
I don't know exactly what I would chuck in, but one of the things that I think might be in line would be performance. So if you have a performative, you have something like Coke adds life. So Coke does not add life. Coke is caffeinated sugar juice that tastes like candy, that has bubbles that burn your throat. So Coke does not add life. So take those things and throw them away. We're not in that age anymore. People want to know specifically what something does and what its value is. And you don't, something that's way more interesting is the actual truth. So give them the actual truth about what your thing is, whatever it is. If it's a DAO, it's fantastic. Tell them the truth. That's far more interesting.
Wow, telling them the truth in marketing, mate. I don't know whether that'll ever catch on, but I like that idea. That sounds splendid, Don. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure, fascinating conversation. But when people spin the dial on the interwebs, where can they find you?
You can find me at don@film.io or go to Filmio Official on Discord, and then you can see what we're up to.
Wow, of course you're on Discord. You're right there with the cool kids. That's amazing. So that's splendid. I'll include all your links in the show notes. I'd encourage people to go look at some of this stuff. The Filmio website's fascinating, and really enjoyed this conversation. And just before we were recording, there was a couple of other things you were talking about, so maybe you should come back on the show. Thank you very much, Don.
I'd love to. Thanks. Enjoy.
Thank you, Don. Listeners, my advice, do a podcast and get to chat with fascinating people. I don't know much about Hollywood, but it sounds like a great application of all this Web3 stuff we keep hearing so much about. And I will, of course, include all of the links to Don and the things we discussed in the show notes, which you can find at rockstarcmo.com. Right, talking of Hollywood, time to join my LA-based chum who does know a thing or two about Hollywood, Robert Rose, Chief Troublemaker at the Content Advisory, as we wind down the week in the Rockstar CMO virtual bar. Good evening, Robert. What are you drinking?
Oh, hello, my friend, and welcome to the bar. It is, it's good to see you here. It's Friday. It's been a long week, and we have just the most, we're just going to do a basic. It's the end of summer, I think, is the way, and I know it's probably ended there already, to a certain degree, because I think
at least
summer
this year
ends.
We can say, at least this. Sorry, you go.
I was just going to say this. I think that summer ends in London probably around April, I think it is, or somewhere.
Well, what I was going to say is at least this year we actually had a summer. So
yeah, that's true. That's true. We
had 5 days of heat furnace heat or something or other like that. So yes, it is indeed. Summer is waning here too. So we're both.
Yes. So we'll have a little bit of a celebration of a summer drink, because this week we had a bit of a end of summer gathering at our house, and we ended up having this drink that we'll have tonight, you and I, called a Paloma, which is a classic tequila cocktail. It's about as easy to make as it possibly can be, which is simply tequila, a little lime juice, and grapefruit juice. And it's just a wonderful thing. So you just literally, as taste allows, put in a squeeze of lime, a little bit of grapefruit juice, and then your favorite reposado tequila, and you have a very refreshing summer drink. Now, some people like grapefruit soda. In other words, they like it sparkling. I'm not a sparkling drink fan for the most part. So I just use grapefruit juice, but you can also use grapefruit soda. Palomas are so popular that in many cases you can find them in a can. Like you can literally find Paloma in a can in your favorite grocery store. So I would not recommend that. I would recommend making it yourself. But to each his own, as it were. We'll be having them freshly made, custom made, bespoke. Because
we're classy. And talking of bespoke, I shall attempt to make that drink using only the ingredients on my desktop bar. So I'm going to start off with what I think we've agreed over the 900 weeks we've been doing this, the most English of tequilas, which is going to be some Hendrick's gin. Oh, no, hang on a minute. Was there ice in yours?
Yes. Oh, yes. This is a summer drink, so it is chock full of ice.
All right. So I've put some ice in that. I shall pour in some of this lovely gin. And you said some people like this Paloma sparkling, did you say?
They do, yeah. Some people do like it sparkling. I do not, but others do.
Oh, okay. Well, instead of the lime juice, I'm going to go with, what have we got here? This is tonic water with from the lovely people at Fever Tree. And they've put in some cucumber, which we both know is the most English of limes.
Yes, indeed.
So let me give this a taste.
The most English of limes. Yes. There's a joke there, but I'm not going to even go close.
Is it limey? I don't know. Yeah. This is delicious, Robert. What are we calling these?
We would call that a Paloma if you had tequila or any of the ingredients that it requires. Yes.
Well, this is delicious, and I could drink one of these every week. And where are we drinking these, Robert?
Well, I thought we would celebrate the end of summer by going somewhere. Tropical, and so there's a place, and in fact, it looks like my wife will actually be traveling there. So I did a little bit of research into it, and it's a place called Dominica, which is just off the British Virgin Islands, actually. And it's its own little country, and it's sort of untouched and beautiful, and it's got beaches and whales and very tropical. Nice. So I figured we could go sit on the beach for one last summer weekend and hang out on the beach and drink some Palomas.
I love it. And what reason would you have for not going if your wife will be there? It sounds beautiful. Yeah. Yes, it sounds beautiful. So we are enjoying these post-summer drinks and enjoying the last of the summer in this beautiful tropical island. Conversation turns to marketing, as it inevitably does. What are we talking about this week?
Well, I thought we'd talk a little bit about strengths and weaknesses. One of the things that I have been doing with clients of late, especially those that are forming a new content marketing or content strategy team, is to do a skills audit. And the reason we're doing a skills audit is because we end up in this situation where the team that's being formed isn't net new. In other words, they're not net new people. They are people coming from different parts of the organization. Sometimes it's marketing, sometimes PR, sometimes demand generation. They're coming from different, but they're new as a team, right? So they're new. Right. They have new charters. They have new governance and workflow responsibilities. They have new measurement capabilities and technology sometimes. And so there's a lot of new. It's funny, in business, we often call this change management, but it's really new management for the most part, because the skills and the techniques and the approaches for this content strategy and content marketing are mostly net new to most businesses. And it's a new team doing them. And so what we end up doing is a bit of a skills audit to see where people are, not necessarily to identify their weaknesses, but in many cases to identify the strengths that they have so that we can see where they might focus first as a team in order to get some real ground movement before we start focusing in on, okay, where do they need to close gaps, either with new resources or new training or new skills that they need to develop. And there's actually a great deal of thinking that's done on this. There's a wonderful book called Strengths-Based Leadership, which was written probably 20 years ago from the folks from the Gallup organization. And they did a 30-year research project on how to invest deeply into the talents and strengths and minimize the effects of a weakness of a team. And that's the approach. But conversely, there are a lot of people who think that, focusing solely on strengths has its pitfalls. And there is some Harvard Business Review articles about this, which is thinking that, if you get wrapped up around strengths, well, there are a lot of weaknesses which are actually just overdeveloped strengths. A great example of that is you might have a really politically astute team leader, but that team leader actually might be quite manipulative as a boss. And so you want to, focusing on, for example, the speed or the creativity of an in-house design team. They're like, oh my gosh, they're so amazing. They're fast and they're creative and we love them. But you might lean so heavily into that strength that all of a sudden now they're overworked and considered idiosyncratic in their behavior, and they're, basically they're just ornery, right? Because they're so overworked. And so deciding on whether to focus on strengths or weaknesses is not just an easy decision, but what I find is for new content teams, especially where they're doing so much new things, it's good to focus on the strengths, because when we focus on the weaknesses or what they have to, shore up, it can lead to a perception that it's not working, like the content or the marketing or the content strategy isn't working because they're trying so hard to get good at something that they're not good at, that they haven't actually exploited all the things that they are good at, and it creates this initial impression that the strategy isn't working. And so focusing on those strengths can be a great way to actually build in the muscle that you need for content strategy, and then focus in on where we need to shore up some of the things. It's a nice way to phase in some of these new activities that the content team is going to have to really take on, but also acknowledge that there are things that we're not going to do, literally acknowledging publicly, we are not going to do this because we don't know how to do it or we're not good at it yet.
Right. That's interesting, isn't it? Because a few thoughts popped into my head there around that. And one of those is, I was thinking this was probably, a good exercise with a content team or with a multidisciplinary team like that, is because you'll find the team tends to lean towards what they know or what they're good at, right? So I think in the past we've talked about this, where we've talked about, we always do this function, or we always produce these papers or this kind of content because they're in the habit and that's where their strength is, right? Whereas it might be that, I don't know, research isn't they don't have anybody who's particularly good at research, and so they don't. So I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because then you can kind of detect a bias maybe in the work that people are doing based on those strengths. Is that what you see with these teams?
Yeah, well, what I see is that it's a place to carve out your initial spot, right? Mm-hmm. In other words, in many cases, when we make the business case for a content marketing team or a content strategy team, or both, by the way, the business case we make can be based on things that the team won't initially be good at. And so a common one, for example, might be content reuse, translation and localization for the global organization, right? Yeah. And we say, if we can create a team that creates content and creates an efficient process and reuse and repackaging idea and really get into translation and globalization, then we'll save the company money and we'll be more efficient and we'll have time to do higher quality content. That becomes the business case, right? However, the new team that's being associated with that might not be very good at translation and localization to begin with. Yeah. And so focusing in on that core benefit of the business case can often be a mistake, because you end up in a situation where you're over-promising and under-delivering. And so commonly what we would say is, let's carve out all of the responsibilities, the superset of responsibilities that content strategy and content marketing want to take on. Right. For example, building a blog or building a resource center. The team might not be good at that yet, but it might be good at writing, and it might be good at creating really creative ideas, and it might be good at something else. And so looking before after you've made the business case holistically, but before you put together the roadmap of telling the bosses or whoever it's going to be what you're going to do, doing that skills audit and wrapping your roadmap, certainly for the initial phases, around the strengths of the team that come out of that skills audit, so that you can actually get that traction that you really need. But acknowledging that, of course, we're going to add this or not add this or whatever it is as we shore up the different weaknesses that we have, but focusing on strengths first.
Right. And then I think that's interesting, because that was the next thing I was going to ask you about, is then, do you then have a model for what are the things that you need in an optimal content strategy, content marketing team, that you then, I like this idea that you're saying, is that in an ideal world, this is what your content strategy and content marketing should look like. It'll do these things. But when we do the skills audit, we can see, okay, so we haven't got the skills. Let's say that the normal process to do A, B, C, D. we've got the skills in-house at the moment to do a lot of C&D. So let's pull them things forward and do those while we work on getting those other things in place. Is that the sort of thing you're saying here? So there's a model that you can implement, but it needs to be done within the strengths and weaknesses of that team that you're coming across.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And we actually do have a model that we work from, for sure. In terms of, we have what we call our 6 core responsibilities of a content team. And within each one of those 6 responsibilities are obviously skills and capabilities that you need, which are, people skills, process skills, and technology skills to make those, each of those responsibilities, a core capability. But once you've explored that, then it's wrapping your roadmap around which of those 6 and which within those 6 you're going to take on and how you're going to take it on and roll it out. And that's the benefit of doing that work, is really, not just saying, yay, we've got a content team, let's go, right? Let's take it all on. And it doesn't work very well.
Yeah, especially as the first time I put together a content team, and you were there because you helped and you were consulting when I went back in the day, I was basically given a kind of a hodgepodge of, and I hope none of them are listening and feel this is in any way an insult, because it was a wonderful little team, but they came from different parts of marketing, and because content marketing was a fairly new discipline, so therefore, they had a different skill set, which wasn't content marketing. So I had somebody who was really good at editing, I had a writer, but I had to discover those things. Do you see what I mean? And I think, is that still the case with content marketing? Because it's still a new unit within marketing that people are putting together. These people are coming from different parts of marketing, and so you need to there's always going to be some development that needs to be done.
Yeah, I think, right. It's always evolving, right? It's never done. Yeah. You know what I mean? Yeah. It's always changing, and it's always evolving, and that's one of the things, right? I mean, it's this is marketing, really, where the needs, the skills, and and everything changes, and so content may actually have more change than most, and the change may be more rapid than most other functional areas, but ultimately, you're absolutely right. It's a process. And we've talked about it on this show before, where today's world, for content strategies especially, it's much less important to understand what you're changing into and develop the strength to just change full stop. Because in many cases you don't know what you're changing into. You just have to have the ability, the strength is not understanding what we're trying to transform into. The strength is the ability to change into whatever we need to.
Yeah. And also what I was thinking while you were talking there is that if you find strengths in a team, like they're very good at video, for example, and there's a videographer on the team, then the solution to every problem is a video. You get that kind of thing.
Well, exactly, precisely, right?
Yeah.
You often, and that, by the way, that is one of the pitfalls, right? That that's that overdeveloped strength becomes a weakness, right? Where you've got everybody on the team just happens to be amazing at video. Now all of a sudden the entire world is your video nail, and all you need is a hammer, right? And so we need to acknowledge that we need to have the awareness to be able to acknowledge that, yes, we may be, we may not choose, but by the way, the team that we get, it's almost like the Magnificent Seven, right? You're pulling together this ragtag team of people from all sorts of backgrounds, and coincidentally, you're all great gunfighters, but that doesn't mean everything has to be a gunfight.
Honestly, I was going to say the good, bad, and the ugly, and I really shouldn't have. Again, in case any of my team from way back then, over a decade ago, were listening, but it was a bit like that. It was absolutely like the Magnificent Seven. Much better analogy. So that's fantastic. Thank you very much, Robert. So we've got to look at our strengths and weaknesses, and if one was to evaluate how am I going to make this segue? The strengths and weaknesses of their content, say like against an example of some great content marketing, where would they find that, Robert?
Oh, they're not going to find it with me. That's for sure. Yeah.
What would they find?
We have our little wall of content built over at contentadvisory.net, and would love to connect with everybody.
Splendid. And when they spin the dial on the interwebs and they're looking for you, where are they going to find you?
Well, now that Elon's going to buy Twitter again, I've been trying to bet back on Twitter, but we'll see what happens with that. But other than that, yes, I'm on Twitter and LinkedIn. Easy to find.
Splendid. And also, I'll include a link to that book you talked about, Strengths-Based Leadership by Gallup.
There it is.
So also in the links. All right. Thank you very much, Robert. And most importantly and selfishly for me, will I see you in the bar next week?
Well, of course. Yes, absolutely.
Splendid. Thank you very much, mate. I'll see you then. Thank you, Robert. Marketing skills, a popular topic here on the podcast. So that's a wrap on episode 136 of the Rockstar CMO effing marketing podcast. I've been your host, Ian Truscott. Thanks to Jeff, Don, and Robert for sharing their insight. Please say hello to them. I'll include all their links in the show notes, which you can find on your favourite podcast app or at rockstarcmo.com, where you can also find all our previous episodes. But most of all, thank you for dropping a dime into your podcasting jukebox, selecting our track and jiving along with us. So, does the world need another effing marketing podcast? Please let us know on the socials, or drop a rating or review in your favourite podcast app, or just keep listening. I'm glad you're here. Next week, Jeff will be in the studio. I'll go backstage with Todd Irwin, owner of New York agency Phaser, and Robert will be back in our virtual bar. Until then, have a great week, and I hope you again join us here next week on Rockstar CMO FM.
This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.